I believe artists are time travelers. I think we're all time travelers.
Back in the 1980s, Kiese Laymon was a hard-headed black kid growing up in Jackson, Mississippi, and he says there was a ton of cultural pressure on him just to be excellent at everything.
So like when my grandmother would tell me, and my mother would be like, you need to pretty much look like, Malcolm X when you go to school every day with a bow tie and all of that. I'm like, I don't want to wear a bow tie. I'm a little fat kid. Like, bow ties make me sweat. I'm not doing it, I don't care what you tell me. I'm not.
And then at school, with that bow tie crumpled up and hidden away in his backpack, he had a lot of questions about the books they had to read.
How come nobody that you're making me read looks like me, comes from where I come from, and talks like I'm from? And you're like, well, because those people don't create classics.
That did not go over well with Kiese Laymon.
Well, so then I'm going to get upset, and I'm going to try to create some art that like a newer version of me in the future can actually enjoy.
And now he's chair of English at the University of Mississippi, and that's exactly what he's doing.
Yeah, it's hard, but it's not the end of the world, even as we know it.
Welcome back to Fireside with Blair Hodges. In this episode, author Kiese Laymon talks about his fantastical novel, Long Division. It tells the story of City, a black kid in Mississippi who discovers a hole in the ground that can transport him through time. That's a dangerous proposition for a black kid in the South.
Like, so when City goes back, he looks at 1964, yeah, he has a premise of what it's like, but then he sees all of these things that aren't what he imagined at all. And I think similarly for you, I'm just guessing, you're gonna find things that you never ever imagined.
By digging into the past, City has the chance to change the present and the future, just like us.
So I definitely believe that we all have the capacity to time travel. The question is like, what do we want to do with that time? Like, what do we want to do?
What do we want to do with the time? This is episode 4, Revision. Kiese Laymon joins us today, and we're talking about his novel, Long Division. Kiese, thank you so much for coming to Fireside today.
Thank you for having me, Blair. I'm happy to see you again.
I read Long Division just a couple weeks ago, and it's sort of like, it's like Back to the Future if it was set in the South, where young black kids have to reckon with like racism and the KKK at the same time that they're dealing with stuff like puberty. Or is that a terrible way to, is that
Pretty
right?
much. That should be the synopsis.
How did you come up with this idea?
I grew up with my grandmother for summers, like early in Mississippi. We used to sit on her porch. Mississippi, like tornadoes just always come through every community. And the tornado missed our house, but it hit the woods right across the street, right across the road. And they took this giant tree, like uprooted it. So there was this massive hole in the woods. And I would just sit on my porch sometimes. And I mean, to this day, I swear I saw these two small people crawl up out of that hole. And I got my friend Shirley to come over, and we just watched that hole one day for hours. And when I had my head turned, she said, I saw him. And I was like, you saw him? And so long story short, I just wanted to make a story out of what we believed was true, which was like that there were these time traveling kids in a hole across the street from our house. And I wanted to add all kind of things to it. It's also heavily influenced by hip hop and Invisible Man and Bluest Eye, stuff like that.
Yeah, so there's a lot of influences from like music and literature and all this stuff, and then your own personal experiences. Introduce us to City. This is a character here, or maybe it's like two characters.
Yeah.
Talk about City. Who's this kid?
Well, all right. So Long Division is a mirror. It's a mirror novel. So like all the main characters have mirrors, except for City and Bays, right? Like Bays and City are the only names that remain the same. There's also like mirror scenes. And so City 2013 is this young boy who like wants to rep for his people. He's like, I want to rep for all the black folks out there with contentious demeanors and like head full of waves. He wants to do his thing, but he's got this arch enemy named Lavander Peeler who wants to like show white people what black people can do. So they got beef from the rip, and they're performing in this like, can you use this in a sentence contest? And as you know, they get there, they find out that the contest is rigged. City has an onstage meltdown. He becomes.
Yeah, I want to tell people about what that is. So basically, it's like, it's not a spelling bee. It's like they give a kid a vocabulary word and then say you have to use it in a sentence, and then they judge it by like dynamism, and appropriate use, and all this, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a flip on battle rap, right? Like I'm obsessed with hip hop, and really, I think hip hop, when I got into it, I mean, it was the culture, it was the breaking, it was the DJing. But mainly it was the MCing, and the MCs were just really, when you break it down, they were having sentence contests. And I just wanted to bring a sentence contest in honor also of like the Battle Royale and Invisible Man, Ralph Ellison's Invisible Man, and put that central. But really, man, like City is just one of millions of kids who's grieving, and he's trying to grieve creatively. And he can't talk about what he's grieving because he doesn't know. All he knows is that these older people are always telling him he needs to watch out for white people. He knows these white people are like talking to him like he's not him, and he's grieving a lot. But he's grieving, through creativity. And he finds his book called Long Division. He sees his name in the book. So we get the other book with City's name in the book. So it's like a book within a book within a book. But real talk is just like, black kids and really Jewish kids in Mississippi trying to make a way.
So he goes to this contest and he's up on stage and then he has this meltdown.
Right. He has a meltdown, because everybody at his school and in the city has been hyping him. He's representing the state, and they give him a word. They give him the word niggardly, and City is a, well-read young person, but that word, it throws him. He's like, wait a minute, like Nigga is in that word. So are you giving that word to me because I'm black? And, he doesn't understand that word has nothing to do, with black people or really race in any way.
Yeah, it's like stingy.
Right.
Yeah.
But he's still like, why the would they give me this word? Like, why would you give me this word? And so he doesn't use it, quote unquote, correctly. And he snaps, you know what I'm saying? And he goes off. He goes a racist diatribe. He goes off on the Mexican brother and sister who were there. He goes off on the judges. He goes off on everybody. But he's also sort of trying to emulate a Biggie type character. He's just like, I'm also doing this for my confidants over here and blah, blah, blah.
Yeah. He's giving shout outs all over the place.
Yes. And he's like deaf to my opposition. And, he just uses the moment to snap. And he becomes a little quick internet sensation.
He ends up getting sent to be with his grandma for the summer, and that's where he encounters this tunnel that can take him back in time. Right?
And that part is biographical because whenever I would act up, I would get. Heavy has a scene in there too like that. Whenever I would act up, my mom would send me to my grandmama. But in Long Division, he's literally getting sent to his grandmother so she can baptize him, ideally to baptize the quote unquote devil out of him, right? And
we should mention too, Heavy's the memoir you wrote. We'll talk about that a little bit later. So he is down there to get baptized. Did you have any experiences like that? Did anyone try to get you religion that way?
Oh, yes. I got baptized, much earlier. I think City gets baptized at like 13. Mm-hmm. I got baptized at 8, and
yeah, me too.
it was a wild experience, man. Like for a long time, like I thought I was like, I had the glow. You know what I mean? Like when you come up out of that water and you're so young, you don't really know what's happening, but you know that the adults around you are treating you different.
Yeah.
And there's so much lore around the baptism and so much fear leading up to it. So the fact that you don't die makes you think that you're like, like the Lord has you, So I wanted to sort of play with that idea of like having a ceremony that welcomes you into like this. City calls it like a gang of believers and followers. I'm not at all. I think it can read like I'm poking fun at baptism, but baptism is so important in my family's life. I'm not. If anything, I'm just poking fun at that immediate post baptism when you literally think you and Jesus are like boys. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah. Another thing, and maybe this was sort of incidental, but I also thought about like he goes with the baptism stuff, but then he later goes underground. There's a different burial for him.
Absolutely.
And then he's buried and comes back out as well. And that's
brother. That's it. So man, I'm so glad you got that. Yeah. I'm playing with religiosity and the religious myths that I was raised on all throughout. And so, you can also read it as his getting baptized into a loving relationship with Lavander Peeler, his arch nemesis, but it has to happen under the ground. It can't happen above ground. Like they've written those young boys and those young characters off the face of the earth, but they're coming back. You know what I'm saying? There will be a resurrection, as I think the book implies. Yeah.
So you mentioned too that City deals with a lot of adults who are kind of telling him about how to act around white people and this kind of thing. There's the principal of his school, Principal Reeves. I have a quote here that I'll read this from the book. It just says, Principal Reeves was always teaching us how we were practically farting on the chests of the teenagers on the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee if we didn't conduct ourselves with dignity. That seems like a lot of pressure. Like,
right. Yeah. But that's autobiographical too. I grew up like a child of the movement. My father was in the Republic of New Africa when I was born. My mother just was super committed to politics in Mississippi. And, I can't remember when I wasn't getting speeches about how I needed to be better behaved because young people were better behaved in the late 60s and all of that. So,
Mm.
the entire first half of that book is lots of adults telling City that he's not being a black young child the way they want him to be a black young child. And they want him to emulate them and these other young children. But City doesn't say this, but in City's mind, there's no way those young children were as boring as you say they were. I'm just going to go out and fight for justice. Yeah, maybe, but they also were goofy as kids. And City's saying, like, I want to be a goofy kid. I get the weight. I get it all. But, like, can I just be free? And they're like, no, the stakes are too high. You cannot be free. And the City's like, well, I'm going to be free one way or another,
And this is what I've heard so much is like parents of black kids talking to them of like, what you do would reflect on black people as a whole. This idea that everything you do reflects on us as a people, which
Yes.
which isn't fair to anybody,
Right.
but it does seem to happen. And then also the idea that it's dangerous. It's dangerous even today for black kids. We know of kids wearing hoodies going to
Yeah.
the store to buy Skittles and end up being killed. So
Absolutely. And City does this thing where, he has this really, I think, terrifying encounter with a white dude who saw him on the internet.
yeah, his video goes viral. His
it's-
rant goes viral.
Because his rant goes viral, and this white dude, for the most part, plays with him, takes his wave brush, and then they kick him in the chest. And City knows not to tell his grandmother, but he doesn't know why he doesn't want to tell her. But he thinks if he tells her, something bad might happen to the white dude or to him. And so, like, yes, I get why these adults, be it grandmothers or mothers or uncles or aunts, are like, you have to behave within this small corner. Like, you can't go outside the lines, because if you do, like, death awaits you. But City is saying, but death awaits us anyway. And what kind of life am I to live if I cannot be free anywhere? So
Yeah.
he's not using that kind of language, but that's what's driving him.
Did you feel a lot of yourself was put into City, or is he sort of different from you that way?
A book like that comes alive once you realize that character is not you. I was not nearly as, like, I couldn't write the way that kid could write. I didn't have the words. I wasn't as courageous. But I was hard-headed. You know what I mean? Like, when people told me things, if I thought about it and it just didn't make sense, I just wasn't going to do it. Do you know what I'm saying? So like, when my grandmother would tell me, and my mother would be like, you need to pretty much look like, Malcolm X when you go to school every day with a tie and a bow tie and all of that. I'm like, I don't want to wear a bow tie. I'm a little fat kid. Like, bow ties make me sweat. I'm not doing it, I don't care what you tell me. I'm not. So I wasn't City, but I was definitely hard-headed if it was something that I realized just didn't make a drop of sense. And sometimes, the way my grandmother and my mother believed in respectability, it didn't make too much sense to me. So I kind of pushed back.
Did you know any Lavander Peeler kids? Like, did you know any kids like that?
Nah, that was just Lavander Peeler. I mean, I'm sure I know some people like that. I know grown people like that for sure. But Lavander Peeler came about where, like, I was challenging myself to create a character that I personally, like, was sort of, like, disgusted by, but you got to make that character turn. So, like, early in that novel, like, Lavander Peeler does something on stage that City has to respect, and I have to respect as the writer. But, initially I was trying to write a character I couldn't stand, but then I was like, all right, what can you make happen to this character to make you really respect and love? And as we see, he realizes that the contest is rigged and he could still win it because they want him to win it. And Lavander Peeler does something differently. He does, I think, what a hero does. And he becomes more complicated. So I didn't know any Lavander Peelers as children. I met a lot of Lavander Peelers as adults, though.
This is one of the interesting contrasts that you bring out in the book. So at the contest where they're doing the word contest, Lavander had been talking to City and saying, man, you're kind of getting played. Like, don't you see what these white folks are doing? They're bringing us in as black people to kind of show how enlightened they are or how open they are to, multiculturalism or whatever. But it's a trick on us. Right.
Yeah. And I mean, that's exactly it. Like, Lavander Peeler he thinks he's hip to it. He's like, they just brought us here. But even in his mind, he doesn't think that they're going to rig the game so they can win. He's like, yo, they don't even know what they're about to run into. But the worst part is he's like, you shouldn't even be here. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Like, they wanted you to be here. They gave you the black words in the regionals. And City's like pondering. He's like, they gave me the black words, and of course they gave him the word chitlin, and
Yeah, which is like, it's a really soft pitch. Go ahead and knock this one out of the park.
right. And
Which is devastating to him, I think, right? Like he gets it right then, but he's on stage, he's on TV now.
yeah, he's on stage at TV, and the word that Lavender gets is the same word City got in the regionals, but unlike City, Lavender intentionally uses the word wrong because he doesn't want to win like that. But he's also not prepared for what it means to lose so dynamically in front of the world.
I love that scene, by the way.
Thank you, man.
So back at City's school, there are a lot of ways that they're experimenting with different forms of punishments. They're coming up with like creative ways to try to get kids to behave. And there's this test that you include. It's like a list of true and false questions, and you include the whole test. So if a kid gets in trouble, they'd sit them down and make them take this test. Is this based on a real thing?
I mean, it's based on the curriculum from the SNCC's Freedom Schools. So later in the book, like there's a quote from Charlie Cobb where when Freedom Summer came to Mississippi, where Charlie Cobb is saying about these kids. I mean, it's sort of paternal, but he's like, these kids have not been given the access to question. He's like, they're superiorly gifted, but the system they're in has sort of attempted to strip them down and make them feel ashamed. And so like we as teachers have to think about like what pedagogically we can create to encourage these kids to be as bright as they are. And then later on, some other characters like, yeah, but everybody needs a test. So if it's inspired by anything, it's inspired by the SNCC curriculum and the Freedom School curriculum. But in terms of like the actual questions, that's just that to me is just stuff that I want people to ask themselves after they read the book.
Yeah, that's what it felt like, is like it's the book's test laid out right there. And for people who don't know, SNCC is a group of students during the civil rights movement that were organizing to oppose segregation, and they organized sit-ins and all kinds of things.
Right.
And freedom schools were ways to prepare them to be able to confront society.
Yeah, and Freedom Summer. I mean, Freedom Summer is a violent, deadly summer, and really what it is like organic groups from in Mississippi collaborating with groups of people outside of Mississippi to try to register to vote, yes, but also to create like healthy, loving schools for kids, because as we know, black kids, because Mississippi wasn't interested in healthy, loving schools for black kids at all, then or now. Yeah,
let's look at some of these questions because they bring out some themes in the book. So there's a bonus question. It says, write 3 stories in 3 different time periods, and the 3 stories should explore a question that you've been afraid to ask. Are you, in this book, exploring questions that you're afraid to ask?
Oh, absolutely. I'm absolutely exploring. I mean, there's so many questions. I mean, the big question is like, how do we educate all of our children? How do we educate our children in this nation? Not just black children in Mississippi, not just Jewish children in Mississippi, but how do we fairly, ethically, and honestly educate? And one of the answers to that is like, we're not doing it right. The second thing is like, do we actually want to be free? Like, do we know what freedom is? Do we want to be free? Is time travel something we actually believe in? That's something I'm asking myself as a writer. I believe artists are time travelers. I think we're all time travelers.
Yeah, how do you define time travel then? If we're all time travelers, how does that work for you?
Yeah, this is the thing about our language. I think once you have past, present, and future tense, like verbs, you literally are asking us and the people you're talking to come backwards. Like right now, like if I am going somewhere, I'm asking you to come with me present. Like I'm about to go somewhere. Blair, you want to come with me? Or if I'm saying, Blair, we went home yesterday. You remember that? Like we're going backwards. We're going in, so I'm just playing with Toni Morrison's idea of the past, present, and future all existing in the same time through an idea of rememory. But I think artists not only change the future by, the art we create in the present, we change conceptions of the past. If you think about like what the greatest artists in our world have done, not just to futurity, but what they've done to the way we understand what happened yesterday. I mean, you want to talk about time travel? I grew up reading Richard Wright. Like Richard Wright is why I'm here. A month ago, I blurbed a Richard Wright novel. That's weird, dude.
Yeah.
Like that, you know what I mean? Like it's weird that a Richard Wright novel be released in 2021, and then it's like more weird that I'd be asked to blurb it, like a little black boy from Mississippi. So I definitely believe that we all have the capacity to time travel. The question is like, what do we want to do with that time? Like, what do we want to do? And I think like Long Division is literally like premised on that question. Like, what do we do when we go back and forth? And we don't go back and forth alone. A lot of times we take versions of ourselves, We take people we love, we take people we hate, but like, what are we going to do? What are we going to do to ensure that the people coming after us and the people who came before us have more choices and better access to love?
Well, that seems to complicate another question on that test. There's one that says only a fool would not travel through time and change their past if they could. True or false? It seems like we don't have a choice then.
I mean, I think you have a choice of what you do with that time. But I think we all time travel. I think if you use language that is premised on an idea of present, past, or future tense, like we are living, and I think we live in language. I think we're traveling through time. I mean, time is a construct just as language is. And so anyway, I think we're all time travelers, bro, especially writers. Like we literally have to be.
There's another question on here, true or false. You were brought to this country with the expectation of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And growing up for me, like that's what I was taught. That's what I was told, that was that way for everybody. And I would have easily just said true. So as a
Right.
white person taking that test, I would have had a really quick, easy answer. What about a black kid taking that test?
I mean, again, I think there's some immigrant groups here who might argue, who could say yes, but you know, I'm a black boy from Mississippi. Like I come from people who were stolen, you know what I'm saying, from West Africa. And most of those people did not make it. And we were brought to the coast of the Carolinas and then eventually to the Gulf of Mexico to be labor, right? We were extracted to be labor, to create laborers and to die. And so, you know, you want to talk about magic and time travel, like it's a dastardly magic, I think, that makes people go to another place, grab human beings and bring them over to do labor that won't be compensated. But it's another kind of magic or beyond magic that those people who were brought here are now doing stuff like talking on computers about art. I wasn't brought here to do that. I wasn't brought here to pursue life, liberty, and pursue. We were brought here to be labor and to absolutely die. You know what I'm saying? And we had to fight, and thankfully, like lots of white folks fought with us, but we had to fight to even get to where we are now. But we weren't. I just think it's important. I always make it clear, like we weren't brought here to thrive. We were not stolen to come here and thrive and think and talk about love. That's not why those people brought us here.
And you had to time travel to do that. And you had to access like a particular past that
Right.
for me growing up, I wasn't really expected to access that past. So my time travel was kind of back to a much more generic sort of white history of America's great. People wanted freedom. And so they came here and created a great country. Right.
Right,
So
right.
I could time travel, but I'm coming out of a different hole even when I try to time travel. Right.
I feel that, but you know what I would say is yes, and like all of our histories, like this is what long division is about. Like have to really be not just contemplated, but like you know made gross. Like so when City goes back and he looks at 1964, yeah, he has a premise of what it's like. But then he sees all of these things that aren't what he imagined at all. And I think similarly for you, I'm just guessing, like if you do research and not just take what people have told you about your past, you're going to find things that you never ever imagined, right? And I just
Exactly.
think that's what we have to encourage ourselves, but definitely young people to do. Like in the way we have to encourage young people to do what adults have a hard time doing, which is to be like, don't listen to me. Like, don't be like me. Don't be me, which runs antithetical to what most schooling is, because most schooling is like, I want you to either think like me if I'm the teacher or be like me if I'm the teacher. And the closer you get to that, the more likely you're going to get an A. I think that's deadly. I think that's deadly pedagogy.
That's Kiese Laymon. He was born and raised in Jackson, Mississippi, and he is a professor of English at the University of Mississippi. We're talking today about his novel Long Division that's being reissued. Now, this book, Key, is experimental. It's constructed kind of as two books spliced together. In fact, you have to physically turn the book upside down. You read one half of it, and then you got to turn it around and start from the other side. Was that how the first edition was as well?
No, that's how I wanted it to be. But again, I didn't have enough juice to get the publisher to do what I wanted. So it was interspersed. It'd be one chapter from 2013, one chapter from 85. It was much harder to follow. But I always wanted it to be a flip book. I wanted the two books to meet in the middle. When you get to the middle, you're in the woods, like there's leaves. So, you know, I'm trying to nudge readers to understand, like, you know, when those characters are like, I hear something, what is that? Like, you're in that hole. Like, if I've done my job as a writer, like, you're in that hole with the leaves, with those kids. And the question is, like, what are we going to do down here? And what do we do when we come up out of there? Because we got to come out, I think.
Well, and that's great because the book itself has a complicated history too. So as I said, this is a second edition, but it's not the kind of edition that happens when a publisher wants to celebrate the anniversary of a publication or something. That's not the case with Long Division. What happened here?
Yeah, I was struggling, man. Like I was struggling to get my work out. I had a book deal with Penguin Putnam, and initially they told me to take the book out of Mississippi. This is after they already bought it. They're like, all right, maybe think about placing it in New York. And I was like, okay. And they're like, maybe think about making the narrator a white girl instead of a black boy. And I tried to do all of that. And they're like, I want you to take the racial politics out of the book. And at that point, I was just like, all right, I can't do that. I don't know what you're talking about. So I gave the money back. And then I was just out there. But my friend Jasmine Ward published a book called Where the Line Bleeds with this press out of Illinois. I thought if they got Jasmine, they might get me. So I sent the editor 3 or 4 books. They called me back the next day or so. And they were like, all right, we want to do this. And, so they paid $1,000 for How to Slowly Kill Yourself, and they paid $3,000 for Long Division. And we went on to sell like 60,000 copies or so. And I went to them at some point. I was like, all right, we've sold a lot of copies. I want to repackage the book differently to the way I actually intended. I want to take some essays out of How to Slowly, add some more. And the dude was like, nah. And I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, actually, if you want to do that, you can make me an offer. And I was like, make you an offer, brother. Like you made like hundreds of thousands of dollars off of these books, like, cause in my heart, I'm just still like a fat black boy from Mississippi, like who believes like friendship is honor. Like, and I thought that dude was my friend. And long story short, he initially he was like, I needed to pay 300,000 or something like that. And I was just like 300,000. Anyway, I got him down to 50. So I paid $50,000 to get the rights to my books back. Then I made I think a pretty good deal with Scribner to reissue the books, and that's why Long Division and How to Slowly have come out in the last like 5 or 6 months.
And there's an essay in How to Slowly Kill Yourself and Others in America, which is a collection of essays where you talk about the publishing history of this. And here's a quote. You say, in the midst of the most death-filled summer of our lives, because of COVID-19, I bought my first 2 books back from the publisher so I could revise and reissue them. Securing the rights to my books, revising them, and publishing the way they want to be published are the most loving acts I could do for my work, my body, my Mississippi. Yeah. So this is an act of love, you say.
Yeah, I mean, it's again because of so much of the history that we're talking about. You know what I mean? Like if you're brought to this continent as an extraction, and you constantly have people devalue your great-grandmama, your grandmama, your great-grandfather, blah, blah, blah. And then in this situation where I am thankful that dude gave my books a shot, but it wasn't a fair deal. I shouldn't have signed the deal. And then when I went back to him and was like, yo, can we change this up? He's like, no, you got to give me more money. I just think, okay, maybe I would do that if I didn't come from black folks who were stolen, who have been like underpaid and not paid for our entire, but given my history and our history and what was happening in this country, I just had to get my books back, fam. Like I just had to get my books back, and going forward, I just want to make sure that I only collaborate with people, not who agree with me, but at least who have some sort of like reciprocal love. You know what I'm saying? Like, and that's kind of the person I am. Like, if I work with you, we collaborate. I want us to work on critically loving each other. The stuff that happened to that book at Agate was not loving at all. Like, you don't charge somebody $50,000 for a book that made you over $300,000 when they didn't hardly make any money off of it. That's just wrong. It's just wrong.
You describe a lot of these difficulties in your books, and over the years, you've gotten a lot of advice from different people, from editors and others, about what it would take for you to succeed as a writer. And we get to read that advice because you report a lot of it in your writing. I have a few examples of that, and can I ask you about some of these?
I love it.
All right, so let's start with Margaret Walker. I think this is a woman who had mentored your mother, is that right?
Yeah, she was my mother's mentor, but she was also one of the most famous writers to come out of Mississippi. She wrote For My People, Demonic Genius, Jubilee, incredible writer.
Okay, so yeah, you're sitting down with her and getting some advice, and here's a quote from her. She's speaking about black writers in particular. She says, "Our communication is the mightiest gift passed down by our people. Every word you write and read should be in the service of our people." What do you think about that advice?
Absolutely. It's the most important, not just writerly advice, but like like human advice that I think I've ever gotten. Like, I just think I think America and capitalism, and we're all a part of it, encourage us to do things that aren't in our best interest. And what Margaret Walker was trying to say is like, you got to calm all that down. And when you step, or when you write, or when you listen, or when you make, or when you accept, you have to do that with intentionality. And I just think that was incredible advice that I try to heed every day, and I fail every day.
As a Black writer, that means you're going to have to confront things like racism. And it reminded me of something that you wrote in Heavy. Let me read this quote. You had been rereading some James Baldwin stuff, and it sparked a lot of questions for you. But you said, when you're reading it, you said, I wondered what Black writers weren't writing when we spent so much creative energy begging white folks to change.
Ooh. Yeah, man. And I went through a phase of doing that. You know, that's actually why I got kicked out of school, kicked out of Millsaps College. I still ask that question. You know what I mean? Like I think we live in this world now where, you know, Baldwin seems so far ago, but Baldwin wasn't that long ago. Martin Luther King, Toni Morrison. I'm talking about a lot of people who died. Octavia Butler, Fannie Lou Hamer, Ida B. Wells. These people, to different degrees, I think, tried to show the nation what it could be if it reckoned and changed. And some people listened, but the majority of people did not. And I just think sometimes it's important for me to understand, like, when I'm trying to write that essay where I can, like, convince white people to change, sometimes I need to be like, yo, Baldwin, like the illest, I think, essayist on earth, couldn't get these people to change. So maybe you need to write another essay. Do you know what I mean? Sometimes I think it's really important to work through your own demons instead of encouraging people to try to reckon with theirs. I'm not saying it's either or, but when you spend all of your time trying to get people to, like, reckon with themselves, you're literally not spending as much time as you should trying to get yourself right. And I think I had to sit in Baldwin and Margaret Walker to really understand that.
Yeah, so that brings up this advice from an editor that you call Brandon Farley. This is a pseudonym for an editor that had originally began to work with you on Long Division. And this, I think this is from an email, right?
Yeah.
Did you quote from email? So it says, the success of your book will be partially dependent on readers who have a different sensibility than your intended audience. Too many sections of the book feel forced for the purpose of discussing racial politics, but white people buy books too, bro.
Yeah, that's a quote. That's a quote.
Yeah.
I mean, in a lot of ways, the quote is true. White people do buy books, and the people that Brandon was trying to sell me to did not share sensibility. But as a young writer, my point to the editor was like, there are lots of people out there who you all are not trying to write to. Like, I'm one of them. And I'm like, if like let's put out some weird art or some art that doesn't, you know, can't telegraph where it's gonna go, and see if we can create an audience. And it didn't work at that time, so I had to create a lot of essays and to create my audience. You know what I mean? Like, I had to create a lot of viral essays in 2012, like 4 or 5 viral essays. Like, that was how I got put on, right? I started working at Gawker. I started writing these essays. They went viral, and that attracted like the kind of readership that I imagined existed, that the New York writerly editorial community said did not exist. I knew we were out there because I was one of those people. I knew it. I knew we were out there. And I knew that there were a lot of other people who didn't think there would be audiences for these books that also wanted the kind of stuff we were offering. And you saw that with Heavy. You know, Heavy has, tons of Black folks and tons of folks of color really feel that book. But there are also lots of white folks who you would never imagine filling that book. You know what I mean? So
I would put myself in that category. I'm just like white guy from Utah who, I love Heavy. So
I mean, and I'm a Black guy from Mississippi, and I love Utah. You know what I mean? Like, I just love being like confronted with like a reality that is loving, and that's what I want people to feel in Heavy, and that's what I long to feel in different art too. I like to read art that's not intended for me. I just don't like when I have to do that in school.
Yeah,
and when I question, how come nobody that you're making me read looks like me, comes from where I come from, or talks like I'm from? And you're like, well, because those people don't create classics. Well, so then I'm going to get upset, and I'm going to try to create some art that like a newer version of me in the future can actually enjoy.
So it sounds like you didn't really feel a lot of pressure to sell out or to kind of like water down your stuff.
Oh, it was
temptation.
Pressure. It was
Okay.
pressure, but
what about
I had a
temptation?
job.
What about like,
I had a job.
Did you ever feel like, ooh, maybe I should do that?
You know what? I didn't have children, and I wasn't married. You know what I mean? Like, I had a job. Like, I was a professor. Like, if I wasn't a professor, I always say this, fam, like, I would have done exactly what that editor asked me to do because I needed the money. Like, I would, and I needed the money, but I just couldn't write a Long Division with like white girls narrating it placed in New York without racial politic.
Put it in Utah.
I mean, yeah. I mean, they might as well have been like, you want to place it in Salt Lake City? I mean, like, they might as well, like, because I had just moved to New York. Like, literally, I didn't know anything about upstate New York.
Yeah.
I had no idea. They were like, place it in the forest upstate. I was like, what forest? I don't know shit about upstate New York. But they thought they could sell that. Like, look, here's the black kid who can write white characters. Like, they wanted to sell like a trick. And I was like really wanting them to sell literature,
Yeah, well, I mean, I think it's wonderful that you had the opportunity to hold out and write the book you wanted to write. So there's another piece of advice here that we'll talk about. This one comes from your own mother. She's also an academic, but as your memoir Heavy talks about, she's also someone who's had a lot of struggles. And you're pretty candid in the book about some of the most difficult aspects of your relationship with family. And in the book, you talk about how she was unsettled by that because you're exploring things like abuse and things like this. And so here's something from her in Heavy. She says, I just think you share too much with people who don't love either of us. You've got to be much more careful, Key. White folk do not deserve to stick their nasty hands into our raw.
Right.
Hiding from them and being excellent are actually the only ways for us to survive here.
Yeah, I don't believe that. So I love my mama, like, and she is why I'm here talking to you. But the notion that you have to hide from white folks might be true, but what I'm asking is, like, what are the consequences of that? Because the things that she's asking me to hide from white folks, she's also asking me to hide from her. She didn't want me to talk to her about the insides of addiction. She didn't want me to talk to her about the ways that I've stolen and failed people. She didn't want me to talk to her about that, much less talk to white folks. So I get it. Yes, historically, and in my life, if you give white people access to your insides, they're not going to do anything good with those insides. But also historically, when you give yourself access to your insides and give people who love you further access to your insides and long to have access to other people's insides, it's harder for any people in the world to stomp you out. Do you know what I'm trying to say? So my mama is brilliant, but I just don't agree with that.
It kind of reminded me of like the principle from the book Who's Sin.
Right.
You've got to put your best foot forward. Look, plenty of people are already going to be prejudiced. Plenty of people are already going to bring racism. So if you talk about these real issues, it could feed that. It could give them false justification for continuing oppression.
It could. And Martin Luther King was the most regal person we know, and he got murdered in Memphis at the Lorraine Hotel. Do you know what I'm saying? So
wearing a business suit.
Wearing a business suit, brother. So that's my thing. You know what I mean? Like, I grew up in Jackson with a lot of charismatic, well-dressed black men who the state went after. I grew up with a lot of, like, black race women who were, like, putting us on their back and carrying us all. I mean, my mom is one of those people, and the state to varying degrees tried to, like, make her suffer. So I get it. I just don't think you can out-talk or out-dress your way out of terror. It's not, I just know, I don't think it works. It might, though, but I don't think it does.
And in Heavy, you're not just talking about problems that other people have. The book is really about issues that you've had. It talks about weight gain and weight loss and this really unhealthy relationship you had with your body, where I would say even just sort of abusive, just painful stuff. So you're really putting yourself out there. This is a really personal book. Was that scary to do? You talk about even like you almost committed suicide once. You sat in a bathtub with a gun to your head. You describe what you had done.
You know what, Blair? I'm gonna be honest with you. I never answered this question like this before, but I grew up played basketball in college, played football and basketball all through high school. And, when I was playing football, man, I played middle linebacker and I played fullback. I was like 230, 240. But basketball was my real sport. But the coaches were like, you look like a running back. But the problem was, if I saw somebody coming at me with their head down, I didn't have that thing that, like, is going to put my head down and try to run them over. You know that thing that like NFL players have, particularly linebackers? I didn't have that in me. I just didn't have it, bruh. But in writing, I got that thing, which is like, if there's a hole in you, I want to explore it. And I want to ask myself how much of that hole I see in you is like the hole I find in myself. And so there are a lot of people who are going to turn their head away from themselves and their relationships to addiction and failure and also, like, lush love but my mama made a writer. I ain't turning my head away from that shit. If I see it, I'm putting my head down and I'm trying to go in it. And that is bruising. It can be another form of abuse. But that's how I am. So like, is it scary? Yeah, but it's kind of like I'm wired that way, bro. Like, and the football analogy is the only way I know how to talk. Biggie was wired. You know, I don't know if you really into like hip hop, but like Biggie was like that. Like Biggie and suicidal thoughts. Like it's hard to talk to people about not wanting to live anymore, especially when so many black people are like we've struggled and we suffered so you could be alive. But I know all of those people at different times thought about not wanting to be here. I know most of us in this world have thought about not wanting to be here, but most of us in this world aren't literary artists. And so as literary artists, I want to walk into that feeling of wanting to kill myself. And I also want to walk into that feeling of hearing my grandmama's voice and having that voice save me that day. And that's just how I'm built, bro. Like I can't even take no credit for that. That's my mama. She made that.
And you said, like, you're a writer. That's what you are.
That's what I am.
And there's something that you write where you said that you knew you were going to be a writer for a really long time. You say, I had no idea if I would eat off what I wrote, but I knew I had to write to be a decent human being.
Right.
How does writing help you be decent? Decency.
Well, for me, it goes back to that question about past tense and living in the, time travel. I think writing is the bedrock of my practice of revision. Like looking at how I've lived a day, lived a relationship, lived a piece of art, and going back and assessing what my vision for that day or that art or that life was, and then trying to like revise it and make it better. And so like that's how I live my life, and that's how I live my writing life, and that's how I try to live my real life. Like, there's a lot of things that this Trump administration brought to us that I think people will be writing books about forever. But the most deadly was like Trump's inability to revise, like Trump's inability to say we or I messed up and I need to go back and assess that. Do you know what I mean? Like, I just think revision is the most important gift we can give to any kid in this world. And I just think adults have a hard time modeling it. So I'm just trying to be better at that myself.
And that takes me back to long division too, because when you do long division, teachers are always saying, show your work, right?
Right.
And there's a sense in which if you show your work and the sum is incorrect, you can go back and revise. You have to do that.
That's
but
the
you're right.
point.
When people don't show their work, when they hide their long division and they come up with the wrong answer, they're not going to revise it.
Right. How do you know if, if I was to be like, what's 200 divided by 75? And like, we going to both guess like 2.56. Okay, but how about we do the work? How about we do the work and see where the mistakes are, see where the successes are? Like, that's it, bro. Like, that's what long division is. Like, I'm asking these young black characters, these young Jewish characters, these young white characters to go back and and they're telling us like, we're gonna show you the work, and we want y'all adults to show your work too. And that's the only way we can talk about whether the work is like deadly or loving or triumphant. But when everybody trying to like hide their work, you can't revise that way.
You've talked about how fiction for you, and probably your essays too, when you think about what they can do for other people, you think about what they can do for you. And you've written that you want your work to help readers become better lovers of those they profess to love.
Yeah.
And you wanted to become a better person, not just a better author, but a better person who's worthy of forgiveness and risk. Well, so you're really looking at how literature's not. It doesn't seem like a game to you. This seems maybe there are game-ish things about it, like it can be playful, it can be all that, but it seems like you're really trying to reach and help people change and help yourself change.
The stakes are so high, and I don't want to get on my literature bandwagon, but imagine growing up like a lot of us did in the 80s. We meet hip hop culture, we immerse ourselves in that. It affects the way we talk, we walk, we listen, we eat, we chew, everything. And then we go to these schools, and not only do the teachers never talk about the culture that we feel loved by, they never give us any books that are written by people who look like us, much less people who actually enjoy some of the things we do. But what they do and instead is give us books and tell us to imitate people who don't see us. So we get better grades if we write ourselves out of our work, because the people who we're told to imitate didn't see us. And so that's why I'm saying, yeah, it's kind of a game, but the stakes are when you lose, brother. I mean, when you win in this game, you lose. And when you lose, like I did in high school, because I refused to do that shit. I refused to imitate somebody who couldn't see me. You also lose. You graduate in the last like fifth of your class, you know? But thankfully, I had this art and I could get into certain schools because I won a lot of writing contests. You know what I'm saying? When in those writing contests, I wasn't doing as much imitating. I was still imitating a bit, but I was just trying. I was searching. I was like experimenting with like audience and voice and whatnot. And so, yeah, it's a game, bro, but the stakes are literally like life and death. And I just think we all have to accept that.
It's frustrating that some people are going to feel uncomfortable with this idea. Here's a quote from you. You said, "You've spent a lot of time as a writer reading and creating art invested in who we were, what we knew, how we remembered, and what we imagined when white folks weren't around." And I can just imagine some people looking at that and saying, you know, it shouldn't matter. Any good art should be good art. Why do you have to think about writing for Black people?
Yeah, we can ask questions for days, but my understanding of history is that it's never neutral. You know what I mean? Like, I think the person who asked that question is assuming that, like, it's neutral and we all got on boats and we saw the United States of America and we were like, hey, we want to go over there and put our feet down and start a new life. Okay, that might be true for you, family, but I think it's even more complicated for you. But
yeah, I agree.
You're right, it's super complicated.
But that's the myth that we have.
The
though.
myth.
Yeah.
The myth is like, hey, all of these white immigrant groups were like, let's go and have a party over there. You know, like look at that statue. She's welcoming us. Okay, that's bullshit. But what is definitely bullshit is the idea that like Black folk, you know, we didn't have that experience, man. You know what I mean? Like we just didn't, that was never our experience. And so the premise of like, why would you ever write to a group of people you've been encouraged to not write to, and you're one of those people? If you break that question down, it makes no sense.
It's that arrogance. I think it really is that, like, what about me? Like,
Right.
what good you gonna do for me, right? But what, as you mentioned, like, we already operate, like, as a white person, I for so long operate from a baseline of perceived neutrality, when in reality, everything has a context, everything has a background. So as a white reader of your work, I can say there are even some times when it almost feels a little bit like I'm eavesdropping. Like,
Right.
sometimes I'm not part of that imagined audience, but for me, I really enjoy that experience. And I don't want to make you into my therapist, but like, what do you think of that? Like, is this voyeurism? Is this what's going on?
I
here,
mean,
you know?
we're voyeurs. I mean, we love to eavesdrop on shit that we like to eavesdrop on, you know? Like, I don't want to eavesdrop on some boring shit. Like, I don't want to eavesdrop on a boring conversation. And so, like, sometimes when white people are like, I couldn't believe how universal your story was or how it appealed to me. They literally say that as if we're like completely different species, like one from planet Black, one from planet White. But like, we are here because all of us came out of somebody that we call mama. You know, whether that person was there after that or not, who knows? All of us were raised in this weird culture that does not ever want to like look at itself honestly.
Yeah.
Now, there's definitely particularities, but like that is the base for all of us. Our parents lied to us, the people who raised us lied to us, and we are encouraged to do the same thing. Now, let's talk about the differences if we want to, but that's baseline. So like, you shouldn't act like whiteness is universal. You shouldn't act so shocked that you can read a book by a human and feel it. You know what I'm saying? I'm a human. You know what I mean? So I get it though. Like, that's American education's failure when people do that. But we got to be better than that, man. Like, white folks don't earn universality. You know what I mean? Like, they just don't. And like, why you're shocked that you can vibe off of a Black book, that's American education's problem. Because you should have been vibing off of Black books from the time you were 2, you know?
Yeah, I really appreciate this about your work. It gives me a chance to really think imaginatively more about what it might be like to be a Black kid in Mississippi. This is the power of literature, right? It's an invitation into these different worlds. It's strange to me that editors would encourage an author to water down those worlds or to try to create a completely different world in order to fit a certain market, when they should know, editors should know that this is what literature's for, is to bring us into these different worlds.
Yeah, I mean, but this is, you know, we met over sports. And the thing about sports is like, you know, to get to play for the Utah Jazz, you have to go through the gauntlet, right? Like, you have to play elementary school, middle school, junior high, AAU, high school, college, maybe, but you got to be great. The thing that I think we forget about is as like workers in this country is that is that athletes might be one of the only groups of people who have had to compete fairly from the jump. Do you know what I'm saying? Like they're competing. These editors, man, these editors who were telling me what to do, how did they get their jobs? Nobody who I didn't know anybody who grew up in my high school who wanted to be an editor. And the thing about those early editors is that to be an editor, you have to come from money because editors don't get paid much. You know what I'm saying? To be an intern, at least like 20 years ago, you had to come from money. So my point is when you don't compete, you sometimes get people who make, and I think the same thing about GMs. You know what I'm saying? Like people who become GMs or president or the people who run sports teams. Like they run in that team because they have the money, but they never had to compete. They never had to show that they could run a team well, which is crazy to me, right? Like how come the people who have the most power never have to fairly compete to use that power? That's what's brutal.
Do you think publishing's changed since you signed a first deal at 28, right? And
Yes.
now you're in your early 40s. And so has
Yeah.
the landscape changed in regard to that?
Yeah, fam. I'm gonna sound very big headed, but I probably shouldn't say this, but yes, it has changed, and it is changing, and this whole long division, how to slowly, like I think my career and the way I've become a writer in this world is one of the reasons. You know what I'm saying? Like Desmond Ward, who was also on Agate, you know, she went out there. Roxanne Gay went out there. I went out there, and I told people about my early publishing deals with this publishing paid me last summer, and that was embarrassing. You know what I mean? Because a lot of people, for whatever, you know, you sell hundreds of thousands of books. People don't think you come from like these like very terrible beginnings, and I just think, you know, my belief, it's like why I came to Utah to talk to the book club. It's why I would support a writer if I met a writer in Utah who showed me some stuff. Like my belief is that the most important work a writer can do is off the page, and it's like encouraging other people to be fair in this writerly community. I think you have to do the work on the page too, but it's a different. You know, we have more thoughtful folks of color from different socioeconomic backgrounds in publishing right now. We definitely have. I think we're seeing a renaissance in terms of like writing generally, Black writing specifically. I think it is changing, but it's like anything else. You turn your head, the backlash will swallow you up. But it's changing for sure, definitely.
That's Kiese Laymon. He was born and raised in Jackson, Mississippi, and he's a professor of English at the University of Mississippi. I noticed that a lot of your bios start off with that born and raised in Jackson rather than, a lot of author bios will say they'll start right off with the academic credential. You start off with your hometown there.
Yeah, it's important. It's important that when people see my name, they say, Kiese Laymon, born and raised in Jackson, Mississippi. It's important when people see me that I look like I look like my uncle. You know what I'm saying? Like I got a hoodie, I got my hat.
Yeah.
That's not at all how I imagine writers growing up. And what that does is it dissuades you from wanting to write because you don't see somebody that you want to be, And I'm not dissing people who wear suits or like the mock turtlenecks and all of that.
Sure.
But we got enough of those people. You know what I'm saying? Like, and we got a lot of writers from Brooklyn and a ton of writers from Manhattan and a lot of writers from LA, great writers from Chicago. I think we have some wonderful writers from Mississippi and Jackson, but I just think it's important that I put on for my city every time people say my name.
Yeah, and it is. It's Jackson, Mississippi. And you're the author of the memoir Heavy, the essay collection How to Slowly Kill Yourself and Others in America, and the novel Long Division that's being reissued in June of 2021. So, Key, I wanted to ask you about a profile that you wrote about a basketball player that couldn't quite make it in the NBA. They were still kind of trying to. They were playing in other countries, and the money wasn't great, but they were making a living, and you're writing this profile on them, and you kind of saw this person as like chasing a dream that they'd never catch. And when you kind of brought this up with him, he just said, "Hey, I'm working, Kiese, and I'm happy." And then here's this quote from you. Actually, do you have the book nearby you? I'd have you read it if you do.
Oh yeah, I got one.
Okay, so this is on page 88.
Okay. Yeah, and then DeAndre says, "I'm happy. That's enough for me." And then I write, "I think, but don't tell DeAndre Brown that I'm working too, though I am not happy. I think, but don't tell DeAndre Brown that deep unhappiness and really this sprawling spiritual emptiness is shamefully enough for me. I think, but don't tell DeAndre Brown that his dreaming inspires me to find my way back to Mississippi, the place I do my most courageous dreaming and witnessing."
Yeah, so you're you're looking at this basketball player and thinking, what are you doing? Like,
Yeah.
kind of wasting your time. And they're like, I'm happy. And you realize something at that time that you weren't.
Oh man, I mean, depression is too light of a word, but yeah, I was suffering with a lot of depression, a lot of bad stuff, and I just needed to be home. I needed to go home to my grandmama's porch, but I'd done that thing where I had convinced myself that if I went back, my grandma, my mama, and everybody would be like ashamed of who would I become or whatever.
Mm.
And talking to DeAndre was dope because DeAndre was like, I know you think I should do this, that, and the third, but he's like, bro, like I've been to like way more countries than you have, and that was true because I didn't even have a passport. And so he's like, I've worked, I've played ball. And he's like, and don't trip, like our dreams were to play basketball for a living. That's what I'm doing. And my thing was like, yeah, but you ain't in the NBA, and you're not preparing, and you could be coaching, and you don't have insurance. And he was like, bro, but I'm dreaming. I'm dreaming in this country, and that's work. And then it just reminded me that my dream wasn't to be a great writer in New York. My dream was to be a great writer in Mississippi. And a few months later, I went back home.
And that's where you are. And you talk about your grandmama's porch
Yeah.
a lot. It seemed almost like a holy place to you.
It's
When I say
holy,
holy, I'm talking about like it's ideal for work and
Yeah.
contemplation.
Yeah, it's our holy place. It's where I remember the first what we call like catching the Holy Ghost. Like I remember Miss Diggs catching the Holy Ghost. I remember talking to my grandmama. I remember asking her questions she couldn't answer there. Sitting on that porch is where I started long division because I saw those little kids come up out of that hole. We sitting on that porch is also where if you turned right, like, during the Trump administration, you would see our neighbors who happen to be Mexican getting raided. If you turn left, you would see our neighbor, Mama Laura, who I write about in Long Division. So, yeah, my career, my first 4 books are really written real talk from like the POV of that porch. It means a lot to me.
It's clear in your writing, and I feel really grateful that you take people there. You took me there as a reader, and I
Thank you.
really appreciate that. Yeah.
Thanks, Blair.
All right, Key. Well, we'll be right back. We have one more thing to talk about. We're talking with Kiese Laymon. He's the author of How to Slowly Kill Yourself and Others in America, and the memoir Heavy, and the novel Long Division. And we will be right back.
The Dialogue podcast is home to tons of great content on LDS themes. There, you'll get access to the award-winning Dialogue Book Report, which hosts reviewers and authors talking about all the best new nonfiction, fiction, and memoirs. We also offer Dialogue Out Loud, beautifully crafted episodes that bring stories and other content from the journal to life. There's also Dialogue Sunday Study, which features a different amazing teacher on the Come Follow Me lessons each time. You'll also get access to the Dialogue Topics podcast, which explores the scholarship in depth of one major issue. And there's more. Subscribe to the Dialogue podcast wherever you get your podcasts, or find them at dialoguejournal.com/podcasts. That's dialoguejournal.com/podcasts.
Hey, it's me, Blair Hodges, and I'm just taking a second here to stir the embers up, keep the flame going for a little bit longer. We've got a little bit more to go with Kiese Laymon, and while we're here, might as well check out some of the latest reviews. And I'm looking at this, and you have been showing up. There are so many new reviews. I'm not going to have time to go through them all right now, but I promise by the end of the series, everybody who sent a review will get a shout out here. But let's just look at a few of these. Meg BGH says, if you love the podcast On Being, you'll love Fireside with Blair Hodges. That's an extremely flattering comparison. Thank you so much. We got reviews from Idaho Jared. Are you familiar with Wyoming? Do you know, are you related to Wyoming, Jared, too? Because it's the same. We got S. Snideman, Judge Ree sent in one. We got one from Tish BW. It says they really like the book recommendations. The best books at the end. Thank you. James Remains sent in a review. That's my buddy James. He says, Blair offers his audience a cozy seat at his side as he engages his reflective guests in refreshingly generous and deep dialogue. Step away from the false flurry of our Twitter-paced public discourse and take a seat next to Blair. Let me, just a footnote to that. Don't step all the way away from Twitter. In fact, connect with me on Twitter. Go follow at PodFireside. I want to get more people on there. We've got a lot more listeners than we do Twitter and Instagram followers. So please, open up your social media. Pause the show. Do it now, unless you pull over to the side of the road and connect with us on social media. All right, one more. We got one from CC Music Bunny. It says, Fireside has turned podcasting into an art form that elevates and touches the soul. The interviews leave the listener with much to reflect upon days and weeks later. Thank you for that, CC Music Bunny. I love reading these reviews. Keep them coming. It makes a big difference. All right, well, let's get back to it with Kiese Laymon. We're talking today with Kiese Laymon about his book, Long Division, that's being reissued in June. All right, Key, it is time for our segment called Best Books, and this is when you get to take the mic and talk about a book that's changed your life, or a book that you recommend, or a book that you don't like, or whatever. It's your moment here.
Since we're talking about novels, I think the book that most recently made the biggest impression on me, the novel that made the biggest impression on me, was a novel by Robert Jones called The Prophets. It is, I always talk about it's polyphonic. There's so many different voices. It's, on one hand, people be like, oh, I don't want to read about slavery anymore. But listen, that book will convince you've never read about slavery, and humanity and humans and the work that humans did to stay alive and the work that some humans did to not in the world. It's also a throwback book, and these characters make these large proclamations like you saw in the 70s and 70s writing. But the descriptions are just so intense. It's exploring this relationship between these two men. It doesn't do the thing where it just walks you in and you're like, do they love each other? No, from the first chapter, they are in love and they are kissing and they are going to show you what love looks like all the way through and the consequences. So The Prophets by Robert Jones, it's that book. It's the novel more than any other contemporary novel that I wish I could write.
When did you read it?
I read The Prophets I read it before it came out because I blurbed it maybe 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, maybe. Mm-hmm. Yeah, but it came out at the beginning of this year. Incredible book. I hope those of you who like to read and like to be challenged, but also just like to be awed, I hope you give it a chance.
It sounds really good. Thanks for that recommendation. Do you find when you read stuff like that it ends up influencing kind of what you're going to write? I'm thinking of hip hop, for example. Absolutely. There's a lot of sampling. There's a lot of stuff that goes on. Does that work for you as a writer?
Absolutely. My friend Deisha Philyaw wrote this book, The Secret Lives of Church Ladies. And that book is it's the best short story collection I might have read ever.
Oh wow.
And it's winning everything. I mean, it's won everything. And it's one of those books that quote unquote slipped through the cracks. It was published by West Virginia Press. But reading that made me not just want to go back, because I used to write a lot of short stories, but it made me want to write short stories differently. You know what I'm saying? It made me want to make the reader catch up. That's what Deisha does. She doesn't hand hold you. She places you in the middle of a scene and she's like, catch up. You'll catch up, and you do or you don't. But yes. I love being challenged. Yes, thank you.
I'm going to write both of those down then.
All right.
So great, man. Well, Keith, thanks so much for doing this. I recommend people pick up Long Division, and it's reissued. So I recommend getting this one. I really like the physical book. There's something about it where you have to turn it upside down to get the other part of it. I mean, you're physically interacting with this book, man. It's just brilliant.
Thank you for that. I wanted to remind people that the readerly experience is a physical experience. Yeah. You know what I'm saying? You got to physically do some stuff. So, yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and thank you. Thanks for being here on Fireside, Key.
I appreciate it.
Fireside with Blair Hodges is sponsored by the Howard W. Hunter Foundation. They're supporters of the Mormon Studies program at Claremont Graduate University in California. It's also supported by the Dialogue Foundation, a proud part of the Dialogue Podcast Network. And thank you to Beyond the Block, our friend of the show and fellow members of the Dialogue Podcast Network. You can check out Beyond the Block. That podcast is especially for Latter-day Saint listeners who are interested in digging into the theology of our current church curriculum, our Sunday school curriculum. Check out Beyond the Block if you haven't checked them out already. It's a great show. All right, well, this episode's over, but the discussion continues. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at PodFireside, and comments are enabled on the website, firesidepod.org. You can click on an episode, scroll down past the transcript, and you'll see the comment section there. You can also email questions, comments, or suggestions about future episodes to me. The address is blair@firesidepod.org. Let people know about the show. We really want more people to join us here at Fireside. The more the merrier. There's plenty of room. The room is unlimited. There's plenty of room. Everybody gets this exact seat that they want. Wherever you want to sit, there's a seat here for you. And don't forget, as always, to rate and review the show. Fireside is recorded, produced, and edited by me, Blair Hodges, right here in Salt Lake City. Special thanks to my production assistant, Kate Davis. She created the transcript. And also thanks to Christy Franson, Matthew Bowman, Caroline Klein, and Kristen Ulrich Hodges. And I also want to say thanks to Mark Bone. He's the one who helped connect me to Mary Rako for our last interview. The Fireside theme music is by Faded Paper Figures. All right, I'll see you in 2 weeks on the next Fireside. It's the place to fan the flames of your curiosity without getting too much smoke in your eyes. Just a little bit of smoke, just the right amount of smoke. The kind of smoke you want to smell on your pillowcase in the morning. That is what we're looking for. All right, see you next time.